Hello everyone, it's History Behind the Warrior, and as always, welcome back to yet another Injustice video on the channel. Now, considering our heavy coverage of the series recently, with a supposed third installment ever looming on the horizon, today I wanted to look away from the main big overarching narrative of it all, and more so focus on the individual characters that, in my mind, are incredibly deserving of a return in the next installment. So whilst this video will most certainly be narrative focused, it will more so hone in on characters themselves, and what exactly do they bring to the story. Like, I'm not gonna mention a certain character with the sole intent and purpose of them being like the center focus of the narrative, but more so, what do they provide to the universe, and what exactly would be the significance behind their inclusion? What do they add to the overall character dynamic of the game? And how exactly does it distinctly separate them from the rest of the roster? And going into this, I do have some somewhat rules with who I do touch on, because in order for them to return, well, they kind of need to be established or exist. So basically, they need to kind of be alive in some way, shape or manner. And finally, I will also be taking into account some outside factors that could possibly impact individuals on here, like relevancy in the Injustice universe and fan demand. However, for a list this ambitious, and with DC's own vast pool of characters, to kind of keep things simple, I'm gonna make this a list video of sorts, talking about the top 5 characters that I personally believe to be incredibly deserving of a main roster spot. Now, with that said and in mind, please remember that this is my own personal list and selection. So by all means, have your own selection. You absolutely do not have to agree with me here. And if so, please leave a comment down below, as I'd love to read them and your own personal choices, especially to see like what other characters fans are yearning for right now. But before we do begin, as always, just a quick reminder here that if you like what we do here and wish to see more, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up, as it really helps support the channel, and subscribe if you want to stick around. And hey, whilst you're here, feel free to try out the new weird hype mechanic thing. I think can only be done on mobile. But either way, all of these things do greatly help both the YouTube video and the channel as a whole. Anywho, let's start things off with a league member that is desperately deserving of a main roster appearance, Martian Manhunter. Now, to say that John Johns had a very minimal appearance in the Injustice series is kind of an understatement. Having only appeared during year 1 of the comics, John early on was one of the very few League members to defect from Clark's side, having recognized what this sort of justice ultimately leads to, actively standing against the Man of Steel. Yet such defiance in Diana's eyes was seen as treason, attacking the Martian and forcing him to act in self-defense, infiltrating her organs and trying to shut her body down from the inside. Because of the dire situation, Clark is ultimately forced to fire his lasers at Diana, incinerating John right out of her body, where he then plummets to the sea, presumably dead. Well, that's where things also get kinda questionable. You see, despite how he was kind of written off, John does make an appearance as a DLC character for the first Injustice game, where it's revealed that after his apparent death, he would escape to Atlantis and seemingly go into hiding, acting as Aquaman's advisor. He's largely remained absent following his inclusion, not appearing at all during the events of Injustice 2, nor its comic book tie-in, which has really brought into question his validity as an existing character. Hence, why I'm actually featuring him on this list here. Because not only do I feel like his inclusion could help clear up a lot of questions, but fill in a lot of gaps across the world that have been largely left open between the time of Injustice 1 to Injustice 2, with his perspective serving as an alternative one to what we see in game, giving us a grander scale and scope of what exactly Brainiac's invasion did to the rest of the globe. So his inclusion is super beneficial for a number of different reasons. Plus, considering the bleak nature of the Injustice universe, where characters just die seamlessly, with a new league having been ushered in, and seeking new mentors and teachers for this new generation, I really do think John is a super solid pick and character to fill in that mentor-like role, having always been one of the more compassionate members of the League. So I think he'd fit into that role really well. Plus, we also get the added benefit that John's own unique Martian shapeshifting abilities actually allows him to stand in for certain characters or even act as an infiltration unit. What I mean is that if a particular character is dead, or narratively written off from within the comics, at least under the assumption that they aren't going to do a Blackest Night arc, John could be under the guise of that character the entire game, allowing them to also be included in-game despite their current state in the universe. It's a smart workaround that could possibly allow dead characters to appear on the roster. And again, with his shape-shifting abilities, this could allow him to work as a sort of Black Ops character that could go behind enemy lines and feed information to the new League, serving as the inside leaker for maybe a Legion of Doom or a secret society of supervillains. And another reason why I do think it's quite important to put Martian Manhunter here is because that, unlike the rest of his compatriots, he has sadly become a bit of an afterthought in many people's eyes, having not featured in as many bits of mainstream media. So something like this could be really beneficial to put more eyes on the character. Now moving on to our next character here, Batgirl. And maybe outside of Martian Manhunter, I really couldn't think of a DLC character that's more deserving of a mainline roster role than Barbara Gordon. Why? Well, to put it simply, I find it to be rather criminal just how insanely overlooked she is, despite her huge narrative role and significance in Injustice, having been stuck by Bruce's side through thick and thin throughout the years. She was wheelchair bound as Oracle for the first 2 years of the comics, before then stepping up to have an experimental procedure performed on her in order to restore her legs, doing this so she could fight on the front lines when Bruce's forces began to dwindle. She's been there through every single Robin and has consistently proven herself as a character. It's insane to me how she's not at all mentioned in Injustice 2. Now, mind you, her absence in the first game is kind of understandable, and in some ways can be waved off, with her integration to the Injustice universe having taken place in the post-release of the game. But canonically in the comics, it would be years after her DLC release, where she would then be written back into the story. So that, I kind of get. But her absence in Injustice 2, it just doesn't make sense, having featured in its prequel comic book line, and having played a hand in it. So in terms of canonical cohesion, there's a bit of narrative whiplash with her absence in Injustice 2, because it's really felt. Plus, like Martian Manhunter in that regard, I do really feel like her return could be incredibly beneficial for fleshing out both her character, as well as what's been going on around the planet, beyond what we see in game, filling in the gaps of information between Injustice 1 to 2. Learning what exactly became of her following the fall of Superman's regime and Brainiac's invasion. We could get some eyes and knowledge about what happened in Gotham. Was she there holding down the fort to keep it safe? Stuff like that is really good for world building. So of all the characters here narratively, she is easily beyond deserving of a spot here. She's earned that right. Which now brings us onto our next insanely popular character here, and someone that just narrowly slipped through our fingers. That is, if the rumors are believed to be true, John Constantine. Now the Hellraiser himself was a very easy pick for me here. Oi oi England! Jokes aside though, of all the characters I am gonna mention here, I pretty firmly believe that John is arguably the most likely individual to appear in the next game. With his cult-like following and rise to more modern mainstream appeal, it would honestly really surprise me if he didn't make the cuts here. And really, as characters go, Constantine's just a really fucking cool character, man. His cunning allows him to just ooze charisma and personality against any character. And it's that arrogance that allows him to stand toe to toe with countless demons, knowing full well that in some way, shape and form, that he does have the edge in some capacity. That confidence isn't misplaced, allowing him to stand in the literal face of Armageddon with little to no fear. Plus, his arrogance and ever cynical nature makes him a very fun and interesting individual in teams. It allows him to bounce off them and create a very interesting dynamic, whether that is as friend or foe. Constantine is always a pleasant inclusion because of what he presents. He is at his heart an opportunist, one who will make underlying deals in order to achieve his goals, which in turn has always brought into question just how trustworthy is he as a character. Now, with that said, unlike the prior two characters, John is yet to appear in game properly, but his absence doesn't necessarily mean he's permanently gone, having appeared in year 3 of the comics and played a vital role in that run, having originally sided with Batman's insurgency, only to have secretly interwoven a plot of his own, one that did allow him to rid himself of both Batman and Trigon, leaving to somewhere currently unknown, but it has been hinted at and is kind of believed that he currently resides in the House of Mystery alongside Zatanna. It's yet to be confirmed, but considering their on and off again relationship, it does definitely make sense. But what's to say he does appear here? What makes him likely to appear on the roster? Well, as magic users go, and well, what's left? Constantine's appearance here is simply kind of a process of elimination, because in Injustice 1, we did get Zatanna, and then for Injustice 2, we did get Dr. Fate, who of course did perish at the end of that game. So it's kind of in turn to open up the roster for a new magic user. And if you wanted a master of the dark arts, then you could honestly look no further than John Constantine himself. Plus, whilst not 100% confirmed, it is worth noting and mentioning that after the end of the development cycle of Injustice 2, there was actually some early concept art and work that did possibly hint that Constantine, at one point in time, was on the cutting room floor as DLC, having either been a part of the original DLC lineup for the fighter packs, or possibly even considered for one last one. The details surrounding this are sketchy as best, but something I did want to mention all the same. And you gotta think too from a story perspective, what on earth has to be going on in order to pull John Constantine of all people out of retirement? What must be going on in order to pull him back into the fray? It simply must be something on a tremendous scale to grab his attention, something he can't avoid or get away from. And again, just to put this all into perspective, he's managed to avoid a tyrannical Superman and an alien cyborg invasion. So if John Constantine is willing to step out of retirement, then it really goes to show just how fucked things are for this man of all people to get involved. Now, a character that I absolutely had to include here, see what I did there, is the King of Apocalypse, Darkseid. Whilst the new god himself has not been narratively pivotal in either of the Injustice games, having featured as a stage transition in the first game, and finally having been playable in the other, he's never been strictly tied to a story in the games, at most only having made his presence be felt during the comic book series, having sent off his son Kalibak to conquer Earth during year 1, and then seen again scheming a plan with Ares during year 4, so his appearances have been limited at best. So why exactly Darkseid here? Even if he isn't the big bad? Well, truth be told, if Darkseid of all characters is relegated to that of a minor antagonist, think of what that means for the larger scale and scope of this crisis event. Think about what this does to the overall narrative. That Darkseid of all characters is not seen as the big bad. It just goes to show like how cataclysmic those events are. Although Darkseid is typically seen as the League's arch nemesis, and they aren't wrong, he is not unstoppable. Whilst there may not be many beings across the universe that can rival his power, they do still exist, going to show that he's not the biggest fish in the pond. There are other cosmic threats that can rival his power and scale, like Necron or the Anti-Monitor as an example. And even outside of that, strictly from a character motivation standpoint, Darkseid has more than enough of a reason to lay siege to Earth, with Kalibak having failed during year 1 of the comics, and being slain by the last son of Krypton. And during year 4, with the exile of the Kryptonian, the non-aggression pact and deal that Superman had with Darkseid is effectively null and void with his exile. Earth's never been more ripe for the picking, so with a score to settle with the Kryptonian, I could absolutely see Darkseid setting his eyes to conquer the Earth, just so when Clark is able to escape the Phantom Zone and finds his home in ruins, he knows who is responsible for this. So even though there's the very real possibility that he could wind up being a minor villain, Darkseid's inclusion is a really welcomed one, elevating the foundation and stakes to match the scale of just how dire things have become. And here's the thing, if Injustice is intended to be a trilogy of games, what better way to culminate the series than bringing in the very gods themselves here? And for my last and final pick of this list here, it is the Last Grayson, Nightwing. I know, I'm kinda cheating here a little bit, but you gotta hear me out, because there's a lot of reasons why he's my number one pick, not just based off what's happened with the character in universe, but outside of it. And I believe all of these reasons make him the most deserving of any character here. Now, I'm pretty sure that everyone unanimously agrees that Nightwing's death in Injustice is kind of bullshit. It's really undeserving for such a beloved character, having been accidentally killed by Damian Wayne. While the circumstances of his demise is largely the biggest controversy surrounding his end, his death is more so a tone setter for the rest of the series moving forward, showing that anyone was kind of on the chopping block here. With that said, this wouldn't be his end, so to say, later returning during year 3 of the comics under a different mantle, this time around as Deadman, having succeeded his predecessor, Boston Brand. Although he's not the narrative centerpiece of these events, he does play a hand in assisting both the regime and the insurgency in defeating Trigon. But from this point onwards, he does largely fade into the background, no longer really being utilized in the continuity. Yet, he does pass over his legacy of Nightwing to Damian, giving him some closure and forgiveness for his honest mistake, and does try to do the same for Bruce, attempting to give him peace of mind, but most importantly, wishing to have him mend things with Damian. For what is a Batman without a Robin, right? And that is what makes me so kind of bitter about it all. Because despite his best wishes and hopes, these bridges aren't mended. And if anything, it gets way worse from that point onwards, from both the games and the comics, with Dick himself basically erased from the narrative at this point. Thus, in my mind, due to this all, it gives him even more of a reason to return, even if he isn't tied to the main core narrative. I mean, hell, from a character interaction standpoint, Dick has so many ties to so many characters in both games' rosters, like Batman, Robin, Batgirl, Starfire, Cyborg, Raven, Superman, Harley Quinn. The list is endless. And keep in mind that when Nightwing did debut in Injustice, this was at a time when NetherRealm did not have character interactions during their intros. So not only do I feel like his return would be deserved, but it's a welcomed one. Plus, I imagine in some capacity, a Robin does have to feature on the roster in some way, shape and form. And with Tim Drake's death and Todd's absence, it just kinda makes sense to me. Again, if I'm treating this as a trilogy and a finale to Injustice, I simply feel like Nightwing is a really good pick here, with his abilities now intertwined with the supernatural. So from a gameplay perspective, he's all but guaranteed to have a completely new moveset. He won't be playing like he did in the first game. And if we're following habits and trends that are set in game, whilst the title of Nightwing is held by Damian, an individual that's had a different mantle in every installment, it wouldn't surprise me at all that by the third game, if he was to relinquish the Nightwing title, and instead succeed his grandfather as the new Ra's al Ghul, because we did see him die in the Injustice 2 comic book line. So again, it just makes sense in my mind. And from a more personal perspective, I'm extremely fond of Dick Grayson. He was my Robin. I was first introduced to the character through the Teen Titans show. He was essentially my gateway to the character, so growing up and also watching the character grow up into Nightwing was really cool to see and watch. So I'm absolutely biased with his placement here, as it is a character that's very near and dear to me. But even with me putting my personal feelings aside, I'm not just solely picking him out of favoritism, but more so redemption. For those who aren't comic book readers, to say that Nightwing has not been handled well in the last decade would be a horrific understatement. If anything, they tried their absolute best to crucify this character from the New 52 onwards, having his secret identity be revealed during Forever Evil, which was completely fine considering the stakes of the story, but everything after that point, liquid dog shit. As they forced him to go into hiding, to abandon his role as Nightwing, and then become a spy known as Agent 37, and then after that, they tried to do it again with a horrible amnesia storyline where he was shot in the head by KG Beast, retired from the title, and then started calling himself Rick Grayson. No, I'm not lying to you, this is real. This was a real thing. End me. And I also think that what didn't help at this point in time is that the Injustice continuity itself is heavily influenced by elements of the New 52. So what happened in the mainline continuity largely reflected in what we saw here. So it all kind of went hand in hand with each other. And that's the reason I want Nightwing here. Because it's only been recently, over the last few years, where that damage has kind of been undone to the character, with Tom Taylor's run under the soft relaunch of Infinite Frontier having kind of redeemed that character. It really helped push him back to the forefront and showed that Nightwing could be so much more than Bruce Wayne's sidekick. So with DC having finally gotten over their fuck Dick Grayson arc, I am all for his inclusion here. He's undeniably deserving of it, and I really don't feel like there is a better time for his return. So with that said and everything covered here, that has been it for what characters do I personally believe to be the most deserving of a return for the next Injustice game, taking into account fan demand, character interactions, and narrative significance. But hey, that's just me and my own personal list. So now I relay the question to all of you of, what characters do you believe to be the most deserving of a return, or finally, a mainline appearance? Please do comment down below, as I'd love to hear what you have to say, as I know everyone's opinion is going to be quite different on this, especially with the vast pool of characters we do have in the DC universe. Please comment down below, as I'm genuinely very interested to read and hear your own thoughts and perspective on these choices here. But until the next one everyone, that has been it for me. So as always, take care, and I'll catch you in the next one.